How many people have fences? Fences around where they live. Okay, everybody has probably a fence somewhere in their house, or not in their house, but in their either in their apartment complex or in their backyard, or even in their front yard at times. I remember we moved into the place we were living at now, and then a couple years later, a lady moved in right in front. As you come into our subdivision, you make a left turn, and then you have to veer left. Otherwise, you're going to run right into this lady's house. And not only did she when she moved in, she was quite neighborly and put up a brick wall between her, and this is in her front yard, between her and her neighbor. Now, it wasn't a high fence, but it was a fence. I thought, man, that's saying something. Don't bother me. And sometimes fences do say that, but fences are good at times, aren't they? Fences can have good effects. Fences keep people from doing things that they normally might do. It keeps honest people honest. It keeps bad people from being as bad as they can be. And so fences have good functions. They're a means. They're a tool that we use in our society to protect. They're a tool that we use to create privacy. They're a tool that we use in all sorts of different ways. In fact, the fences have a lot of different purposes. Now, sometimes fences can have bad purposes too. Now, in the Bible, one of the great fences that you see in the Bible are rivers. God uses rivers many times to define territories. And one of the great rivers that we read about in the book of Joshua is the river of the Jordan River. Now, I don't know how much you know about the Jordan River, but the Jordan River starts up at Mount Hermon, basically, in the melting snow and the underground springs, and it flows downward about 30 miles to the Sea of Galilee. You see my map right here. The Sea of Galilee is up here. The river runs down here, and then there's the Salt Sea down at the bottom, or what we call the Dead Sea. You all see that? You got that picture? Well, as it runs down, and it runs down quite quickly, it flows down to the Sea of Galilee, and then it runs down 65 miles between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, or the Salt Sea. 65 miles, and during that journey it drops roughly almost 1,400 feet. Now, there is a place in that where it drops over 10,000 feet. And then it comes back up. And so the water that rushes down from the Sea of Galilee to the Sea of the Salt Sea rushes down. In other words, there's a current. Now, some of you may be fishermen, right? How many people love to fish? How many people can't stand fishing? Okay, there are a couple of people who can't stand fishing, okay. But if you love to fish, you know, a current really makes things move. And you know, sometimes you're sitting in the stream as the river goes around. And even some people in some nations revere their rivers. Can you think of a place that reveres their river? Think of Egypt, I think of, in the Nile. People revere the river. In other words, they almost deify the river at times. People have done this, whether it is in Egypt or maybe in other places, such as India with the Hindus. They tend to revere natural things that go along like that. And so that's what's going on here. That Joshua is basically dealing with the issue of the river. And the river here is kind of like a fence. It's a fence. It's protecting people, but it's also something that they are going to need to overcome. Now, the title of this message on your bulletin is Navigating Roadblocks. Now, I'm sorry to change it, but sometimes I do change things. I'm going to call it Climbing Fences. Because I think the fence analogy kind of puts forth what is going on. That God is going to give them this land, but they're going to have to cross this river, and we're going to see how they do it. And what we're going to learn in this passage is that God is going to use different means to do this. He always uses means. Now, sometimes God can do anything himself, right? He can make a burning bush do whatever. He can make a donkey speak. He can do whatever he wants to do. But normally what God does, He uses means. And we use means too. We use means. You used a means to get here today. Most of you drove a car, didn't you? Most of you drove a car, or maybe some of you rode a bus, or maybe some of you, I don't think too many, rode the train this morning. But they're all a means to an end. And we're supposed to use means, but we're not supposed to trust in the means. We're supposed to trust in God. And that's a very significant thing, because that principle is so simple. Trust in means, use means, don't trust in them, trust in God. But you know what, as sinners, you know what we tend to do? We tend to trust in means. We tend to trust in what has worked for us in the past instead of trusting in God. I devise plans. As I devise plans, my initial enthusiasm goes up, and as they fall as the plans seem to go or not to go, and you plan every day. You do natural planning all of your life. If you're going to take your sweetheart out on a date, what do? You use the phone as a means to call up that restaurant that you're going to get that, what would we say, that reservation for, right? And you see if there's any availability, what time you need to go, and that will determine what time you pick up your sweetheart, right? We all use means, we all plan. And use them, but don't trust in them, trust in God. Amen. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter 21:31, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord.
Amen. Amen.
Psalm 20 verse 7 says this, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Amen. So what it's saying? We shouldn't trust in horses? Yeah, it says we shouldn't trust in horses. We should trust in God, shouldn't we? And if you ever know anything about the life of George Mueller, he was an example of trusting God. He explained how it relates to our vocations many times. He says we should work to earn a living and supply our needs, but we should not trust in our work, but in God. Otherwise, we'll be ever anxious that our needs will not be met if we cannot work. Listen to what he says. He put it this way. Well, why do I carry on this business? Or why am I engaged in a trade or profession? In most instances, as far as my experience goes, which I have gathered in my service among the saints during the last 51 years and a half, I believe the answer would be, I'm engaged in my earthly calling that I may earn the means of attaining the necessities of life for myself and my family. Herein lies the chief error, which almost all the rest of the errors which are entertained by the children of God relative to their calling spring. It is no right and scriptural motive, he says, to be engaged in a trade or business or profession merely, and I say merely, in order to earn the necessities for obtaining the necessities of life and family. But we should work because it is the Lord's will concerning us.
Amen.
He goes on to say this. He says, but if on the other hand we are engaged in our earthly calling, because it is the Lord's will concerning that we should work, and thus laboring we might provide for our families and also be able to support the weak, the sick, the aged, the needy, then we have a good and scriptural reason to say to ourselves, should it please the Lord to lay me on a bed of sickness, or keep me otherwise by reason of infirmity or old age or want of employment from earning my bread and by means of my labor of my hands or my business or my profession, yet God will provide for me.
Amen. Amen.
You see, he realized that, for instance, our work is a means. And it's easy to trust in our work rather than our God, isn't it? Very easy to do. And I think that one of the problems that they had to overcome in the book of Joshua is just that. Israel was good at trusting the means, not God. Remember the spies went out, what did they do? Most of them came back, and who did they trust? They looked at their own selves, they looked at God, and they trusted themselves and what they could do. Their means, but they did not trust a true vision of God. You see, we can plan, and we can come up with budgets, and we can teach, and we can preach, and we can have Bible studies, and we can have outreaches, we can do all of those things, and all those things are not bad in and of themselves. But we need to trust God, not the means that God may use.